We just talked to the Attorney General, and we talked to the director of the Environmental Quality Director, Dan Wyatt. We bring in now for the other side, Dave Holtz, the director of the Sierra Club Michigan. They said, Director Holtz, that this was a tough plan. There was consensus within the task force. What do you say to those things?
Well, I think the state got it about half right with this report. They acknowledged and documented the threat posed by 23 million gallons a day of crude oil crossing through the Straits of Mackinac in two aging pipelines. They admit that the call that some of us have had to shut down Line 5 is valid and based on the age of the pipeline, Enbridge's terrible track record, and the threat it poses to the Great Lakes. And they say the state has the law on its side, that it could force Enbridge to go to court and to decommission the pipeline. But they put off to the future any decision to decommission the pipe or shut it down. And I guess the best way for me to describe it is if this report were a book, it would be praised for a really exciting plot, a truly threatening villain, but the hero rides off into the sunset without saving the day and really leaving behind a trail of promises.
So it doesn't go far enough, at least not in your book.
Not far enough, not soon enough. I would say that the recommendations in the report, for example, to look at alternatives to the pipeline through the Straits, are exactly the recommendations that we've been calling for. But looking at alternatives should follow a decision to shut down the pipeline and then look at alternatives. What we have to do is we've got there's 4.3 miles of pipeline crossing the Straits. If Enbridge did everything perfectly, if there were a pipeline rupture, everything perfectly, which, we know that hasn't been the case in the past, there would still be over 300,000 gallons of crude oil dumped into the Great Lakes that would already be in those 4.3 miles of pipeline that they could do nothing about. And imagine if that happened in February when the ice cover was, a few inches thick. That oil would spread, drinking water sources to communities would be cut off, businesses would suffer, the environment would be damaged, and there are other options.
So what are those other options? Because they brought up, I forget, the trucking. There were rail cars. There were certain other pieces to that too.
Yeah, those are dodges in my view. I mean, the Enbridge Line 5, which really runs the UP through the Lower Peninsula into Sarnia, is really a shortcut for Enbridge to transfer its oil to the Midwest. There are other pipelines that do not cross the Great Lakes. That capacity could be shifted to, number one. The real thing that Michigan, the oil that they're shipping there, really has nothing in the way of consequences to Michigan residents. It goes into refineries and it goes to a number of different places. We're not dependent on that oil. They do ship natural gas through that pipeline at times. And in the winter, particularly people up north in the UP and other areas of northern lower Michigan, they need that for heating and that sort of thing. But they could keep that flowing through the pipeline. That's not really the issue. We're not concerned about a rupture of natural gas through the Straits. It's crude oil.
So the headline on most articles that you would read is ban heavy crude from the Straits pipeline. Is there heavy crude running through there at this point anyway?
There isn't, and Enbridge has said it had no intention of running heavy crude through that pipeline. And, it's good, though, that the state has taken a policy position that there shouldn't be in the future. And that's a good thing. That's one of the things in the report that I think are a step in the right direction.
We're talking with David Holtz. He's the director of the Sierra Club in Michigan. Were you part of this? Were you in these meetings? Was there any input from the Sierra Club into these?
The meetings, when there's a major environmental threat like this, there's usually a public process so that everyone can sort of who has information to bring can bring it, and then the decision makers can analyze it and make a decision. In this case, the task force was formed about a year ago. It was a handful of government officials, and they took information by invitation only. So it was a pretty closed process. It wasn't conducted in the sunshine. And one of the things that we're concerned about is that they're recommending that there be some sort of process of evaluating alternatives moving forward. But if the past is any indication, that's the kind of thing that they're going to take inside and not do publicly. And that's just been the way they've done things. And, I would say, given all of the constraints of not doing a public process, the task force report is remarkably frank in assessing the problems with the pipeline and Enbridge's reluctance to share information about its safety inspections, even with the state, and what the threats are. So I'm not going to knock the report as being, something that is not useful and not valuable. It just doesn't do the job when it comes to the bottom line, which is protecting the Great Lakes.
Were you a little shocked by the frankness of it?
Yeah, I was. I mean, you don't usually see, particularly, in recent years where you have a corporation-friendly government,
right,
state government, usually being so frank about the oil industry and its shortcomings and failures and the threats that it poses to the Great Lakes. That's not something I really expected to see, but it's there. And, I would like to give credit to the people who wrote the report and their integrity, but I think a large part of the reason that we're seeing these, if you will, admissions of the problems and the documentation and all that is because citizens have really forced the issue. People in Michigan really care about the Great Lakes. And if you go up north, like we have, and, we talk to people up on Mackinac Island and people whose businesses are dependent on the northern tourist economy, they're frightened to death of what could happen if those pipelines ruptured. And they have organized, and they are carrying the message of shut down Line 5.
Do you think that the Kalamazoo River piece with Enbridge had a lot to do with potentially the frankness of this report and actually this report in general?
I think that's a good point because, we're coming up on the 5th anniversary of the Kalamazoo spill, the largest inland oil spill in the country. It certainly revealed, Enbridge's really gross negligence as a company in dealing with that and allowing that. And I think if you're sitting there and you're the Attorney General, you're the Snyder administration, if for no other reason than covering your back, you're not going to want to be accused of whitewashing the problem.
Well, I said the irony is if these things in the report would have been with that particular pipeline, we may have not had the issue in the first place.
If there was some action that would have resulted in that Kalamazoo pipeline, Kalamazoo River pipeline, being improved or removed or in some way, preventing the oil spill. And that's what we've got to see now. Citizens have got to keep the pressure on the Attorney General and the Governor to implement with urgency.
David Holtz, always good talking to you. Thanks much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it myself.
You bet. David Holtz there, director of the Sierra Club Michigan with Kalamazoo's Morning News, 590 WKZO.